I was born to a Muslim family, to parents who were very serious about teaching and encouraging their kids my brothers and I, to embrace our Islam and take it very seriously. And I took that encouragement and I really ran with it. So much so that in my teens and around 18, I had already read the Quran through numerous times. I developed a pretty good understanding at an early age of Islam and mankind's place in the great scheme of things, and who Allah was, and that He was a master of all creation, and that we were simply His servants and we were to submit to Him. And I really understood that He was simply that. He was so other than me, than human beings, that there was no connection with us other than master and servant. While He knew me through and through, I really couldn't know Him. And it didn't bother me for a while. That just was perfectly fine with me as I kind of embraced my Islam and learned Islamic doctrine and theology and history in my studies. And I took my Islam very seriously. I took it seriously because I wanted to preach to people I knew, the Christians, the Jews, the Muslims who were nominal, or the atheists that I knew, about Islam. I really believed in my heart that it was the truth, that God had revealed Himself perfectly in this book through His very words in Arabic to mankind, and that this was the most perfect book ever written because God had written it Himself through Muhammad. And I wanted to give that to people who didn't believe it, who didn't know it. I found myself, during that time, engaging many people of different faiths, as I said, but the most staunch opposition came from Christians. They always gave me reasons for their belief, and that annoyed me. Didn't want people to give me good reasons for their beliefs. I began to study Christianity and read the Bible. I just wanted to see what it had to say, so I had ammunition to use against Christians, so I could show them how true Islam was. And a verse popped up. I believe it's Luke 3:9. Think not to say to yourself that you have Abraham as your father, for I tell you that God is able to raise up sons of Abraham from the stones. Now, what that meant to me was, it isn't important where you came from. What's important is if what you believe your whole life is true or not. And John the Baptist was speaking to me 2,000 years later, telling me, you know what, you're so interested in telling Christians and others why they're wrong. You better make sure you're right. And maybe they are too. And so I got a little bit more of an open mind. I wasn't, by far, I was not a Christian. I had no intention of becoming a Christian, so I decided to do a comparative study between Christianity and Islam, really to see what are the evidences for Islam and what are the evidences for Christianity. Now, I had read the Quran numerous times through, and this verse, for some reason, that I'd read numerous times, jumped out at me, and it meant something different to me this time. It's, I believe it's in Al-Ma'idah. It's verse, which is the 5th surah, verse 45 to 47. The Quran says, let the people of the book, meaning the people of the gospel, Christians, judge by what God has revealed in it. Let the people of the book judge by what God has revealed in it. Now that word for revealed, what He has revealed, is a present tense verb. Now, what this means really is that there is a book that the people of the book follow, and if that command in Muhammad's day, in the 7th century, was to be taken seriously, that means that book had to exist, and it had to exist intact. It couldn't be a corrupt version, because Allah would never guide people to a corrupt book for guidance. So now I have a dilemma. I've got to find out, is this book really that we have today, the gospel that Christians claim is the gospel today, is this the same as the gospel that existed in Saudi Arabia in Muhammad's day? Because if it is, I have to make a tremendous decision to follow this book now. Because the verse later in the Quran says that those who do not follow God's commands and His word are transgressors. And I didn't want to be a transgressor. I wanted to follow God's commands in His book. I began to look into some of the evidences for the transmission of the gospel as we have it today, of the Bible, and see what existed in Saudi Arabia at the time that Muhammad spoke these words, and the Quran said these things. What was the evidence to show that it lasted or didn't last from that time on to now? And from looking through the Dead Sea Scrolls, from examining the textual critical arguments of the great German scholars who had always put down the Bible as being unreliable, and seeing that there's actually great evidence to show that the Bible that was around in Muhammad's day is the same Bible we have today. In fact, the evidence is even better than that. Actually, the Bible, especially the Old Testament, and the New Testament for sure, existed as we have it today hundreds of years before the Quran was revealed to the Arabs in Saudi Arabia. Well, one day, a good friend of mine who had become a Christian, he invited me to go to church. I've never been to church before, and I was at a state where I was kind of open to it. That morning, I was waiting for them to come pick me up, my friends. And as is probably already obvious, I'm not the kind of guy who is very silent. I talk a lot, and I can't control myself sometimes. But this morning, I was uncharacteristically silent. I was just somber. And I go to this church service, and I sit there,